My daughter looked me straight in the eyes on her wedding day and said the words that shattered something inside me forever. I wish you weren't my mother. The bridal suite went silent. Even the makeup artist froze with her brush still in the air. My daughter Claire stood there in her white designer gown, breathing hard, like she finally said something she'd been holding in for years. And me, I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. God, it nearly destroyed me. But because at that exact moment I realized something Claire didn't know yet. Everything she thought she was building that day was about to collapse. And what I did next was something none of them ever expected. If this story touches your heart, let me know where you're watching from tonight. And tell me honestly, have you ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed everything for? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. Your comments mean more to me than you know. People love talking about motherhood, like it's something soft and beautiful, like warm cookies cooling on a kitchen counter, like bedtime stories and handmade birthday cards. But nobody talks about the loneliness of it. Nobody talks about what happens when you spend your entire life building someone else, only to realize they're ashamed of the hands that built them. My name is April Butler. I'm 62 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought my daughter Claire was the greatest thing I had ever done with my life. Now I know I was wrong. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a family that barely stayed above water financially. My father worked at a tire plant until his lungs gave out, and my mother cleaned motel rooms well into her 70s. We weren't miserable, but we were always one emergency away from disaster. Maybe that's why I held on to love so tightly when I met Daniel Butler. Daniel wasn't rich. God, no. He drove an old pickup truck that rattled every time he hit the brakes, and he wore the same brown work boots for nearly 10 years. But he was kind. The kind that's rare now. The kind that notices when your coffee is getting cold and silently warms it up for you. We got married when I was 24. Claire came 3 years later, and for a while, our little life felt perfect. Small house, small paycheck, big love. Then Daniel died. Even now, saying those words feels unreal. One minute, he was sitting beside me at our kitchen table laughing about some stupid commercial on television, and 3 weeks later, I was standing beside a hospital bed holding his hand while machines breathed louder than he did. Massive heart failure. That's what the doctors called it. Claire was 14. I still remember her crying into my sweater after the funeral. "I won't leave you, Mom," she whispered. "I promise." Back then she meant it. Or maybe she thought she did. After Daniel died, everything became survival. I worked full-time in hospital billing during the day and took extra weekend shifts whenever I could. There were nights I came home so exhausted I cried in the shower because my feet hurt too much to stand. But Claire never knew how scared I was. I made sure of that. I learned how to stretch one chicken into 3 meals. I learned how to smile when collection notices came in the mail. I learned how to pretend everything was fine, and I gave Claire every single thing I possibly could. When she wanted to join cheerleading, I picked up overtime. When she got accepted into a better college in Chicago, I refinanced the house. When her old Honda died during sophomore year, I emptied half my savings account to buy another used car. I told myself that was what mothers did. We sacrifice. We bend. We bleed quietly. And if we do it right, our children fly higher than we ever could. Claire was beautiful even as a teenager. Long blonde hair, bright blue eyes, the kind of smile that made strangers trust her instantly. Teachers adored her. Boys followed her around like lost puppies. But she was also ambitious. Very ambitious. She hated feeling ordinary. I didn't understand it at first. When she moved to Chicago after college and started working in luxury real estate marketing, she changed little by little, not all at once, slowly, like watching the tide pull away from shore. At first it was harmless. She corrected the way I pronounced certain wines. Then she teased me about shopping at discount stores. Then she stopped inviting me to work events because, as she put it, those people are intense, Mom. I ignored the warning signs because I missed her too much to confront them. Then she met Ethan Reynolds. Claire called me after their third date. "I think he might be the one," she said. I remember smiling while stirring soup on the stove. "What's he like?" "He's successful," she said immediately. "Not kind, not funny, not thoughtful. Successful." That should have told me everything. Ethan came from money, or at least from people who look like money. His mother, Victoria Reynolds, lived in a massive brick home outside Chicago with marble floors and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my yearly salary. The first time I met her, she hugged me without warmth. You know how some women smile with their mouths but not their eyes? That was Victoria. She looked me over in less than 5 seconds. My department store dress, my sensible shoes, my aging sedan parked outside, and I saw the judgment settle onto her face immediately. "Oh," she said softly. "Claire told us you work in hospital administration. Not what do you do? Not nice to meet you. Just that." Like she was politely acknowledging a service worker. Claire laughed nervously beside her, and instead of defending me, she looked embarrassed. That was the first moment my stomach tightened with fear. Still, I ignored it. Because mothers are experts at lying to themselves. The wedding planning began 8 months later. Claire wanted elegance, luxury, a lakeside venue, imported flowers, a string quartet, custom ice sculptures, things Daniel and I never would have imagined spending money on. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the estimated wedding costs while Claire talked excitedly on speakerphone. "Isn't it going to be magical, Mom?" I looked at the number again and nearly stopped breathing. But then I heard the happiness in her voice, and I said yes. I always said yes. What Claire never knew was that Daniel had left behind more than I realized. A year after his death, I discovered an old investment account connected to an insurance settlement from his union job. It wasn't millions, not then, but over the years I managed it carefully. I lived modestly. I invested wisely. I never touched more than necessary. And slowly, it grew. I never told Claire because I didn't want money changing the way she saw me. Funny, isn't it? Turns out she already looked down on me anyway. So while Victoria Reynolds bragged about paying for floral designers and Ethan talked about family standards, it was my money quietly holding the entire wedding together behind the scenes. Deposits, venue payments, vendor retainers. Claire never even asked how I managed it. She just assumed mothers somehow exist to provide endlessly. And maybe that was my fault too, because I had spent her entire life teaching her exactly that. The second time I met Victoria Reynolds, she invited me to lunch at a country club outside Chicago. Invited probably isn't the right word. Summoned felt more accurate. Claire sounded nervous on the phone beforehand. "Mom, just try not to take anything personally, okay?" That should have warned me, but I was still clinging to hope back then, still convincing myself that every uncomfortable moment was just a misunderstanding between different worlds. I wore my nicest navy blue dress that afternoon. Simple pearl earrings, low heels that pinched my feet after an hour. I even spent extra money getting my hair done because Claire once casually mentioned that Victoria noticed appearances. I arrived 10 minutes early. Victoria arrived 15 minutes late. She swept into the restaurant wearing cream-colored designer clothing that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. 2 women followed behind her, talking about charity galas and vacation properties in Aspen. When Victoria saw me standing near the hostess station, her eyes flicked over me quickly. "Oh, good," she said. "You found the place. No apology for being late. No hug. Nothing warm. Just immediate superiority." The lunch only got worse from there. Victoria ordered for both of us without asking what I liked. Then she spent nearly 40 minutes talking about the wedding like it was a corporate merger instead of a family celebration. "The Reynolds family has certain expectations," she explained while sipping white wine. "Our guests are accustomed to a certain level of sophistication." I nodded politely. She smiled thinly. "I'm sure this whole experience has been educational for you." Educational. Like I was some poor country woman visiting civilization for the first time. I should have walked out right then. Instead, I stayed because of Claire. Everything I did back then was because of Claire. Victoria continued talking. "The florist I selected normally only works celebrity weddings. My son has always had refined taste. Some families simply understand presentation better than others." Every sentence sounded polished and harmless on the surface, but underneath, every word was a knife. Then came the comment that finally made my chest tighten. "You must feel relieved Claire found someone who can provide stability." I blinked. "I provided for my daughter just fine." Victoria gave a soft laugh. "Oh, of course. I didn't mean financially. But she absolutely did, and we both knew it. I looked toward Claire for support. She was staring down at her phone, pretending not to hear. That hurt more than Victoria ever could. After lunch, Claire walked me toward the parking lot. "You were kind of defensive in there," she whispered. I stopped walking. "Defensive? She's just different, Mom." "No, sweetheart," I said quietly. "She's rude." Claire sighed heavily, already irritated. "You always take things the wrong way. Always. Funny how children rewrite history once they stop needing you." I drove back to Ohio with tears blurring the highway lights. But even then, I still told myself things would get better, that once the stress of wedding planning settled down, Claire would come back to herself. Instead, she drifted further away every week. At first, the exclusions were subtle. Claire stopped calling me during planning meetings. Then I found out Victoria and Claire had gone dress shopping without inviting me. "Oh, it was last minute," Claire explained quickly over the phone. But 3 days later, I saw smiling photos online. Champagne glasses, designer boutiques, Victoria standing beside Claire while she cried in a white gown. Mother-daughter moments. Only I wasn't the mother in them anymore. I stared at those pictures for nearly an hour that night, not crying, just numb. A few weeks later, Claire called while I was grocery shopping. "Mom, can you send the second venue payment today? They're asking for confirmation." "No, hello. No, how are you? Just money." I stood beside the canned soup aisle holding my shopping basket while people walked around me. Of course, I said automatically, "Thank you. You're the best." Then she hung up. I remember standing there thinking how strange it was that my daughter sounded sweetest when she needed something. Still, I wired the money that afternoon. Because that's what mothers do right. We keep giving long after we should stop. The rehearsal planning became another disaster. I drove to Chicago for a weekend, hoping maybe Claire and I could spend some time together. Instead, I spent most of Saturday sitting alone in the hotel lobby while Claire toured venues with Victoria and Ethan. At one point, I texted her, "Should I meet you girls somewhere?" Her response came 20 minutes later. "It's mostly vendor stuff. You'd probably be bored." Bored? As if I hadn't spent months paying for half those vendors. That evening, Claire finally came to my hotel room. She looked exhausted but excited. "Oh my God, wait until you see the floral installations," she said while kicking off her heels. "Victoria knows the best people." I smiled weakly. "I'm glad things are coming together." Then Claire hesitated. "There's actually something I wanted to ask you." The tone instantly made me nervous. "What is it?" "Well," she avoided eye contact. "Victoria thinks maybe you should wear something a little more upscale for the wedding." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "She just thinks appearances matter at events like this, and my appearance doesn't meet her standards." Claire rubbed her forehead impatiently. "Mom, why do you always make everything emotional?" That sentence hit me harder than she realized, because I had spent 30 years making sure her emotions mattered. Every heartbreak, every fear, every disappointment. But suddenly, mine were inconvenient. "I'm not trying to embarrass you," she continued. "I just think maybe we should update your look a little." Update your look, like I was outdated furniture. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Claire frowned. "What's funny?" "You used to beg me to braid your hair before school because you said nobody made you feel prettier than your mama." For just a second, guilt flickered across her face. Then it disappeared. That was a long time ago. Yes, it was. A few days later, another blow came. Claire sent me the wedding itinerary. I noticed immediately that Ethan's parents would walk in during the family introduction portion of the rehearsal dinner. But my name wasn't listed. I called Claire right away. I think they forgot to include me. Long silence. Then, "It wasn't really forgotten." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Well, Victoria thought it might flow better if only immediate hosting families were announced." I almost laughed from disbelief. "I am immediate family. Mom, please don't start." "Start what?" Feeling hurt. Acting like a mother. Existing? Claire's voice sharpened. "You don't understand how important this weekend is." "No," I whispered. "I think I'm finally starting to understand exactly how important it is." She hung up shortly after that. That night I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the rehearsal schedule while rain tapped against the windows. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to ask a question I had avoided for years. Had I spent so much time giving Claire everything that I accidentally taught her my feelings mattered least of all? And worse than that, had someone else already convinced her I was something to be ashamed of, because by then I could already feel it happening. Little by little, piece by piece, I was disappearing from my daughter's life while standing right in front of her. 3 weeks before the wedding, I heard the conversation that finally broke whatever hope I still had left. It happened by accident. At least I think it was an accident. Claire had asked me to come to Chicago to help assemble welcome bags for out-of-town guests. Tiny candles, chocolates, handwritten thank you cards. Miniature champagne bottles, all the expensive little details people post online, so strangers will think their lives are perfect. I arrived at the hotel ballroom around noon, carrying coffee trays and pastries, because Claire said everyone would be working nonstop. When I walked in, nobody looked particularly busy. Victoria sat at the center table, directing people like a movie producer. Claire and 2 bridesmaids folded tissue paper, while Ethan scrolled through his phone, pretending to help. The second Victoria noticed the coffee in my hands, her expression changed slightly. Relief. Not warmth. Relief. Like the help had arrived. Well, thank goodness, she said. We were starving. No, thank you. Just expectation. I set the trays down quietly. Claire barely looked up. Can you organize the gift boxes, Mom? Of course. I spent the next hour standing alone near the back table, tying ribbons onto boxes while everyone else laughed together near the windows. Nobody asked me to sit. Nobody included me in conversation. At one point, Ethan joked about someone at his office driving a sad little Ohio mom car. Everyone laughed, even Claire. I kept tying ribbons, because if I stopped, I might cry. Around 2 o'clock, Victoria announced she needed to make a call downstairs. Claire followed her out into the hallway. A few minutes later, I realized I needed tape from the supply cart near the ballroom entrance. That's when I heard them. Their voices drifted through the partially closed hallway doors. Victoria sounded irritated. I'm telling you now because I don't want problems at the wedding. Claire sighed heavily. I know. No, Claire. I don't think you do. Victoria lowered her voice. A woman like your mother does not fit into this world. I froze instantly. Every muscle in my body went still. Claire didn't answer. Victoria continued. She's emotional, unsophisticated, and painfully middle class. People notice those things. Silence. Long silence. I waited for my daughter to defend me. I waited for her to say, that's my mother. She sacrificed everything for me. Don't talk about her like that. Instead, Claire quietly asked, so what do you want me to do? I swear my heart physically hurt in that moment. Victoria spoke gently now, almost comforting. You need distance, especially publicly. The Reynolds family has a reputation. Ethan has connections, investors, clients. You can love your mother privately without making her the center of everything. Privately. Like I was some shameful secret. Claire let out a nervous breath. She just gets so emotional. Victoria laughed softly. Exactly my point. I pressed one hand against the wall because suddenly I felt dizzy. I kept waiting for Claire to stop her. She never did. Then came the sentence I still hear in my nightmares. Sometimes mothers hold daughters back, Victoria whispered, and successful women eventually have to choose what kind of life they want. Another long silence. Then Claire quietly said, I know. That word destroyed something inside me. Not screaming, not insults, not cruelty, just 2 small words, I know. I stepped backward before they could see me standing there. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the tape dispenser. I returned to the ballroom and sat silently beside the gift bags while everyone slowly filtered back inside. Claire smiled at me like nothing had happened. Nothing. That was the moment I realized my daughter had already started separating herself from me emotionally long before the wedding. The humiliation afterward became more obvious. Maybe because once you finally see the truth, you can't unsee it anymore. Claire started correcting me constantly. At dinner that night, I mentioned how proud Daniel would have been to see her getting married. Claire immediately stiffened. Mom, maybe don't bring up sad stuff all weekend? Sad stuff. Her father. The man who worked double shifts so she could go to dance classes. The man who used to carry her on his shoulders through county fairs. I stared at her across the restaurant table. You mean your father? Claire looked embarrassed. You know what I mean. Victoria reached over and patted Claire's hand dramatically. Weddings should feel elevated and joyful. Elevated. There was that word again. Like love only counted if rich people approved of it. Later that weekend, Claire came to my hotel room carrying a garment bag. I got you a dress, she announced. I blinked in surprise. Oh. She unzipped the bag and held up a pale beige gown, completely unlike anything I'd ever wear. Tight sleeves, heavy beading, low neckline. It looked expensive and uncomfortable. I thought navy was my color, I said carefully. Claire sighed immediately. Mom, please trust me. Something in her tone felt rehearsed, like she wasn't talking to me as a daughter anymore. She was managing me. I touched the dress gently. It's beautiful, I admitted. Just not really me. Claire's face hardened. That's kind of the point. The room went silent. Even she looked shocked. She'd said it out loud. But once certain truths escape into the air, they can't be pulled back. What does that mean? I asked quietly. Claire rubbed her forehead. It means maybe this is a chance to present yourself differently. Present yourself differently. I looked down at my own hands, the same hands that packed her school lunches, braided her hair, held her after nightmares, worked overtime for 30 years, and suddenly those hands weren't good enough anymore. Claire softened slightly after seeing my expression. Mom, I just want everything to go smoothly. For who? She didn't answer. That night I barely slept. I sat near the hotel window, watching Chicago traffic below while replaying every conversation in my head, every insult, every silence, every moment Claire chose comfort over loyalty. The next morning, things got even worse. Claire handed out the official rehearsal schedule over brunch. I scanned it casually at first. Then my stomach dropped. Family entrance order. Victoria Reynolds and Charles Reynolds. Ethan Reynolds and wedding party. Bridesmaids and groomsmen. No April Butler. I looked up slowly. You forgot me again. Claire immediately looked irritated instead of guilty. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Victoria smiled over her mimosa glass. We simply streamlined the presentation. I turned toward Claire. I'm your mother. And you're making this harder than it needs to be? She snapped suddenly. The entire table went quiet. Even Ethan looked uncomfortable. Claire lowered her voice, but the damage was done. Mom, not everything has to revolve around you emotionally. I felt like someone slapped me. Because if there was one thing I had spent my life doing, it was making sure everything revolved around her. Her dreams, her comfort, her future, her happiness. I swallowed carefully. Do you know what hurts most? I asked softly. Claire crossed her arms defensively. What? It's not Victoria treating me like I'm beneath her. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. It's watching you help her do it. For one brief second, real guilt flashed across Claire's face. But then Ethan touched her arm. Victoria looked disapproving. And my daughter chose them again. I can't deal with this right now, she muttered before standing up. Then she walked away from me. Just walked away. And sitting there alone at that expensive brunch table surrounded by crystal glasses and fake smiles, I finally realized something terrifying. My daughter wasn't becoming cruel accidentally. She was choosing it. Little by little, decision by decision. And somehow, I still loved her enough that it hurt to breathe. After that brunch, I drove back to Ohio in complete silence. No music, no phone calls, just 6 hours of highway and heartbreak. The strange thing about betrayal is that your body understands it before your mind does. My chest felt tight the entire drive. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. Part of me still wanted to defend Claire. She's stressed. She doesn't mean it. Victoria is manipulating her. But another part of me, the exhausted part that had spent decades ignoring its own pain, finally whispered the truth. Your daughter is helping them hurt you. That realization changed something inside me. Not all at once, but enough. When I got home that evening, my little house felt unusually quiet. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stood there staring at the refrigerator, covered in old photographs. Claire, at age 6, holding a pumpkin bigger than her torso. Claire at high school graduation wrapped in my arms. Claire crying tears of joy when she got her first apartment in Chicago. Every photo told the story of a mother who gave everything willingly. And maybe that was the problem. I had made sacrifice look endless. I made it look natural, expected, invisible. I poured myself a glass of water and noticed an envelope sitting near the coffee maker. I had nearly forgotten about it. 2 weeks earlier, I'd received updated paperwork from Rebecca Hayes, my attorney and oldest friend. Rebecca and I met 27 years ago, after a billing dispute at the hospital somehow turned into friendship. She was sharp, practical, impossible to intimidate, and one of the few people who still spoke to me honestly. She'd been asking questions about the wedding finances for months, questions I kept avoiding. I opened the envelope slowly and reread the summary documents she'd prepared regarding my assets. Even after all these years, the numbers still surprise me sometimes. Daniel Butler had been smarter than anyone realized. 6 months after his death, I discovered an unopened safety deposit box key hidden in one of his old toolboxes. Inside the box were documents connected to a workers' compensation settlement from a chemical exposure case involving his union job years earlier. Daniel had never touched most of the money. Instead, he quietly invested it. He once told me, "If anything ever happens to me, you and Claire will never struggle." Back then, I thought he was just comforting me. Turns out he'd been planning for our future all along. At first, the settlement wasn't enormous, but combined with careful investing retirement accounts and years of living modestly, it slowly became something substantial. Not billionaire money, but enough. Enough to retire comfortably, enough to help Claire, enough to fund nearly an entire luxury wedding without anyone realizing where the money came from. And that was exactly the problem. Nobody realized. Not Claire, not Ethan, not Victoria. To them, I was simply useful, a dependable woman with quiet savings and no boundaries. The next morning, Rebecca called me before work. "You sound tired," she said immediately. "I am tired." Long silence. Then, "What happened in Chicago?" I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, and for the first time I told someone everything. Victoria's insults, Claire's embarrassment, the rehearsal exclusion, the hallway conversation. By the time I finished speaking, my voice sounded hollow even to me. Rebecca was silent for several seconds. Then she asked carefully, "April, exactly how much financial access do Claire and Ethan currently have to your accounts?" My stomach tightened instantly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, have you signed anything recently?" "No." "Have they asked you to?" I hesitated. "Actually, yes, twice." The first time happened months earlier when Ethan casually mentioned streamlining wedding transactions. He suggested adding Claire temporarily to one of my accounts so vendor payments would be easier. I refused politely. The second time was stranger. Ethan invited me to coffee alone during one of my Chicago visits. He acted nervous the entire conversation before finally bringing up real estate. "There's an incredible condo opportunity downtown," he explained. "But because of timing, the lenders are asking for additional guarantors." "Guarantors?" I remember blinking at him. "You mean co-signers?" He laughed awkwardly. "Well, technically." I immediately said no. Not because I distrusted him then, but because Daniel and I had spent years digging ourselves out of debt when we were young. I promised myself never to tie my financial future to anyone else again. Ethan acted understanding at the time, but afterwards something about him changed slightly. Cooler, less charming. Rebecca listened carefully while I explained all this. Then she sighed. "April, I need you to hear me clearly." Her tone made my pulse quicken. "I think Ethan and his family believe you're sitting on more money than you've admitted." I frowned. "That's impossible. Is it—" I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. Because suddenly I remembered dozens of little moments. Ethan asking detailed questions about my retirement timeline, Victoria casually asking whether my home was paid off, Claire mentioning inheritance jokes more than once. Even wedding vendors sometimes contacted me directly instead of the bride and groom. Oh God. Rebecca continued carefully. "And based on what you've told me, I think they expected continued financial support after the marriage." My chest tightened painfully. "You think they're using Claire?" I think Rebecca said slowly that wealthy people in debt often become very good actors. Debt. The word startled me. Wait, what debt? Rebecca paused. I didn't want to say anything until I confirmed it, but Ethan Reynolds' marketing company has financial problems. I sat frozen. How bad? There are lawsuits connected to unpaid contracts. I nearly dropped the phone. What? And Victoria Reynolds refinanced her home last year. That made no sense. People with real wealth didn't usually refinance million-dollar properties unless something was wrong. Suddenly, everything looked different. The luxury, the image obsession, the extravagant wedding, the constant pressure, the subtle financial questions. It wasn't confidence. It was performance. I leaned back in my chair slowly. Oh my God. Rebecca's voice softened. April, I need you to stop assuming these people love your daughter the way you do. That sentence shattered me because deep down, I already knew. Claire thought she was marrying into power, into status, into security. But what if she was actually walking into something rotten? What do? I whispered. Rebecca didn't hesitate. First, protect yourself immediately. That afternoon, I met her at her office downtown. For 3 hours, we reviewed every financial document connected to the wedding. Vendor contracts, venue deposits, transportation agreements, floral invoices. Almost all of them were under my name. Because whenever payments became complicated, Claire always said, Mom, can you handle it? You're so much better with paperwork. Not once did she consider what that responsibility actually meant. Rebecca organized everything into folders while shaking her head repeatedly. They absolutely expected you to keep paying. A strange numbness settled over me. Not anger yet, just clarity, the kind that arrives after too much pain. Before I left, Rebecca placed her hand gently over mine. I need you to prepare yourself for something difficult. I looked at her. If Claire chose them over you, once she said quietly, she may do it again. I swallowed hard. She's still my daughter. I know, and I still love her. Rebecca's expression softened sadly. That's exactly what scares me, because loving someone deeply makes it dangerously easy to ignore the moment they stop loving you the same way back. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ethan invited me to dinner alone. That had never happened before. Usually, any interaction with Ethan included Claire nearby, acting like a translator between our two different worlds. So when he called me directly one Thursday afternoon, I immediately felt uneasy. Hey, April, he said warmly. I was hoping we could talk about a couple wedding logistics things. His voice sounded overly friendly, polished, careful. I almost declined. But part of me still hoped there was goodness left somewhere underneath all this tension. Maybe Ethan wanted to apologize for how distant things had become. Maybe he genuinely cared about fixing things before the wedding. I agreed to meet him at a steakhouse downtown Chicago the following evening. The restaurant was expensive in the kind of quiet way rich people prefer. Dark leather booths, soft piano music, servers who spoke like they were trained diplomats. Ethan was already seated when I arrived. He stood immediately and hugged me. Too quickly, too tightly. How are you holding up? He asked. The concern sounded rehearsed. I'm fine. He smiled. You know how stressful weddings get. I sat across from him carefully. For the first 20 minutes, he behaved perfectly. Asked about work, asked about Ohio, talked about how excited he was to officially become family. But underneath his charm, I sensed nervous energy. His fingers kept tapping against his water glass. He checked his phone constantly. Then the paperwork came out. Literally. Halfway through dinner, Ethan reached into his leather briefcase and slid a thin folder across the table toward me. There are just a couple documents we need signed before final vendor confirmations. My stomach immediately tightened. What kind of documents? Nothing complicated, he said quickly. Mostly procedural. Procedural. Funny how manipulative people always choose soft words for dangerous things. I didn't touch the folder. What exactly am I signing? Ethan gave a small laugh. You really are cautious. Yes, I said calmly. I am. For a split second, annoyance flashed across his face. Then it vanished beneath another smile. It's just temporary financial authorization stuff. Since several wedding contracts are already under your name, our coordinator suggested simplifying payment responsibility. Payment responsibility. I slowly opened the folder. Even without legal training, the documents looked wrong. Dense language, multiple liability clauses, references to shared financial obligation. and one phrase that immediately caught my attention: personal guarantor responsibility. I looked up slowly. This isn't wedding paperwork. Ethan leaned back smoothly. It's connected to the wedding. No, I said quietly. It's connected to debt. His jaw tightened. April. How much debt? The softness disappeared from his face completely. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for me to finally glimpse who he really was underneath all the charm. You're misunderstanding. I don't think I am. He sighed heavily now, as though I were being difficult. The condo financing became more complicated than expected. There it was, the truth, at least part of it. I closed the folder carefully. And you want me financially attached to it. It would only be temporary. No. Ethan stared at me for several seconds. You didn't even read everything. I read enough. His voice sharpened slightly. Claire said you trusted us. That sentence hit harder than he realized, because he used Claire's name like a weapon, a pressure point. I folded my hands together calmly. Trust doesn't mean signing legal responsibility for property I don't own. His smile vanished completely now, the mask slipping. You know, he said quietly, most parents would want to help set their children up for success. I stared at him in disbelief. Most parents. As though I hadn't spent 30 years sacrificing for Claire already. Asking me to risk my financial future isn't support, I replied softly. It's manipulation. The word manipulation hung heavily between us. Ethan leaned forward. You're being emotional. There it was again. That word, emotional. People use it whenever women finally stop cooperating. I slowly slid the folder back across the table. No. Silence. Long, cold silence. Then Ethan laughed softly, but there was no warmth in it anymore. You know what your problem is, April? I looked at him steadily. You still think this wedding is about feelings. A chill moved down my spine. Because suddenly, I understood something horrifying. To him, marriage wasn't emotional. It was strategic. The rest of dinner ended awkwardly after that. Ethan tried recovering his charm, but the damage was done. Once you see greed clearly in someone's eyes, you can't unsee it. When I returned to my hotel room that night, Claire was waiting outside my door. The second I saw her expression, I knew. She knew about the documents. Mom, she said carefully, can we talk? I unlocked the door silently and let her inside. Claire immediately crossed her arms defensively. You embarrassed Ethan tonight. I stared at her. That's your concern. He said you accused him of manipulating you. He asked me to sign liability paperwork for his condo. Claire exhaled sharply like I was exhausting her. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Finally, she said, it would have only been temporary. My chest physically hurt. You knew. Claire looked away. We're trying to build a future together. With my money. That's unfair. No, I whispered. What's unfair is pretending this was about wedding logistics. Claire's frustration exploded suddenly. Why are you acting like we're criminals? I stared at her in shock. Because you tried tricking me into legal responsibility without fully explaining the documents. We weren't tricking you. You brought papers to a steakhouse and expected me to sign them over dinner. Claire paced across the hotel room now. You always assume the worst about Ethan. No, I said quietly. I assumed the best about him for far too long. That stopped her. For one brief second, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Then she hardened again. You don't understand how expensive life is in Chicago. I almost laughed. Expensive life. Luxury condo. Designer wedding. 5-star venues. None of it necessary. All of it image. I looked at my daughter carefully. When did enough stop being enough for you? Claire's eyes flashed with anger. You think wanting more is wrong because you settled your whole life. That sentence hit me like a slap. Settled. As though loving Daniel. As though raising her. As though surviving hardship with dignity was somehow pathetic. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Your father worked himself into an early grave for this family. Claire instantly looked guilty. I didn't mean... Yes, I interrupted softly. You did. Silence filled the room. Then Claire sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. For the first time all evening, she looked tired instead of angry. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered the hallway conversation. I remembered Victoria's voice. A woman like your mother does not fit into this world. And Claire agreeing. What pressure, I asked carefully. To impress people who only value you when money is attached. Claire looked wounded. You're twisting everything. No, I whispered. I'm finally seeing it clearly. Another long silence passed. Then Claire quietly asked, So you're really refusing to help us? Not me and Ethan. Us, like marriage, had already erased her individual responsibility. I looked directly at my daughter. I have helped you my entire life. That's not an answer. Yes, I said softly. It is. Claire stood slowly, her face closed off emotionally in a way I barely recognized anymore. Fine. Just one word. Cold. Sharp. Then she grabbed her purse and headed toward the door, but before leaving, she turned back toward me. You know, Victoria was right about one thing. My stomach dropped. Claire's eyes looked strangely distant. You make everything harder. Then she walked out, and for the first time in my entire life, I locked the hotel door behind my daughter because being near her suddenly felt emotionally unsafe. The rehearsal dinner took place at a private rooftop restaurant overlooking downtown Chicago. Everything about it screamed money. Floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers, waiters carrying champagne trays like they were balancing diamonds. Claire had once told me she wanted her wedding weekend to feel timeless and elegant. But standing there that night, I realized something painful. Elegance without kindness just feels cold. I arrived 15 minutes early because that's how I was raised. You show respect by being on time. Victoria arrived nearly 40 minutes late and somehow still managed to behave like everyone else had inconvenienced her. Claire rushed over the moment she saw me. Mom, she whispered urgently. Why are you wearing that necklace? I touched the small gold necklace Daniel gave me on our 20th anniversary. What's wrong with it? Claire glanced nervously toward Victoria. It's just a little outdated. Outdated? Like me. I slowly lowered my hand from the necklace. This necklace belonged to your father. Claire's expression softened for half a second. Then she sighed. I know. But tonight's aesthetic is more modern. Aesthetic. Not sentimental. Not meaningful. Just visually acceptable. I swallowed the hurt quietly. Well, I said softly, your father never cared much about aesthetics. Claire looked embarrassed immediately. Mom, please don't start tonight. That phrase again. Don't start. As if my pain was some recurring inconvenience everyone had to manage. Before I could answer, Victoria approached in a silver gown sparkling beneath the rooftop lights. There you are, she said to Claire before briefly glancing at me. The photographers are ready for immediate family portraits. Immediate family. Interesting choice of words. Claire immediately followed Victoria toward the photo area. Nobody invited me. I stood there alone near the champagne tower, watching strangers take pictures with my daughter. At one point, the photographer laughed and called out, Beautiful Reynolds family. Not Butler, not Claire's mother. Just the family she apparently preferred now. I should have left then, but I stayed, because some part of me still hoped Claire would turn around and realize what she was doing. Instead, the night became worse. Much worse. Dinner seating had already been arranged when I found my place card near the far end of the table beside two distant business associates from Ethan's office. Meanwhile, Victoria sat beside Claire at the center. I stared at the arrangement silently. Claire noticed my expression immediately. It's just for flow purposes, she whispered quickly. Of course it was. Everything cruel during that wedding somehow became for flow. I sat down quietly while conversations swirled around me about investment portfolios, luxury travel, and market trends. Nobody asked about my life. Nobody asked about Daniel. Nobody asked how it felt watching my only child get married. I was physically present, but emotionally erased. Then came the speeches. Ethan spoke first. Charming. Polished. He thanked Victoria for showing him what excellence looked like. The entire room applauded. Then Claire stood. My heart lifted slightly despite everything. Maybe she would finally acknowledge me. Maybe somewhere underneath all this performance, my daughter still remembered who loved her first. Claire smiled emotionally while holding her champagne glass. I wouldn't be the woman I am today without the incredible people who shaped me. My chest tightened. She thanked Victoria. She thanked Ethan. She thanked Ethan's father, Charles. She thanked business mentors, college friends, even her Pilates instructor. Not me, not once. People clapped loudly while I sat frozen in my chair. The humiliation burned so intensely I could barely breathe. Then Victoria leaned across the table toward one of the guests and said loud enough for me to hear Claire always had potential. She simply needed the right environment to fully become herself. The guest nodded knowingly, as happens with many girls from modest backgrounds. They spoke about my daughter like she escaped poverty instead of being raised with love, and Claire heard every word. She didn't stop them. A waiter approached with wine. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted the glass. That's when someone quietly spoke beside me. "You okay?" I turned in surprise. It was Jason Reynolds, Ethan's cousin. I'd met him briefly once before. Unlike the rest of the family, Jason never seemed particularly impressed by wealth or status. He dressed simply, laughed easily, and spent most of the evening looking uncomfortable around his relatives. "I'm fine," I lied automatically. Jason glanced toward the center table where Victoria and Ethan laughed loudly together. "No," he said gently, "you're not." Something about his honesty nearly broke me. I looked down at my wine glass. "Am I really that embarrassing?" Jason frowned immediately. "What?" "Because everyone here seems determined to make me feel like I am." He stared at me for several seconds. Then he quietly pulled out the empty chair beside mine. "Can I tell you something honestly?" I nodded cautiously. Jason lowered his voice. "My family cares way too much about appearances." That might have been the understatement of the century. He glanced around before continuing. "And most of what you're seeing tonight is performance. Performance. The same word Rebecca practically implied." "What do you mean?" Jason hesitated. Then he exhaled slowly. "Ethan's company is struggling badly." I went still. How badly? Bad enough that Victoria's terrified people will find out. My stomach dropped. Jason continued quietly. "There's debt everywhere right now. Credit lines, refinancing, investors pulling back." Suddenly, the extravagant wedding looked different. Not celebration, distraction. "Then why spend this much money?" I whispered. Jason gave me a sad smile. "Because in this family, looking rich matters more than being stable." I felt cold all over. "And Claire knows." He hesitated too long. That hesitation answered everything. "Oh my God." Jason rubbed his jaw uncomfortably. "I shouldn't even be saying this, but you are," because he said quietly, "You seem like the only honest person in this entire wedding." The words nearly made me cry, not because they were flattering, because they reminded me how isolated I'd become. Jason leaned closer. "Look, I don't know exactly what Ethan's told Claire, but I do know he's been counting on financial help after the marriage." My pulse quickened. "From who?" He looked at me carefully. "You." The rooftop suddenly felt hard to breathe in. Music played softly nearby, while laughter echoed around expensive glasses and designer clothing. And sitting there in the middle of all that beauty, I finally saw the ugliness underneath everything. This wasn't just about status anymore. It was about dependency, expectation, access. Jason's voice softened. "I'm sorry." I swallowed hard. "For what?" "For the way they've treated you." Before I could answer, Victoria suddenly called across the room, "Jason, come join the family photo." The family photo. Jason looked at me sadly before standing. And as he walked away, I noticed something that shattered me completely. The photographer began arranging everyone together beneath the city lights, Victoria in the center, Claire beside her, Ethan holding Claire's waist, Charles Reynolds smiling proudly, even Jason. Everyone, except me. Nobody called my name. Not one person noticed I was missing. I sat there alone at the edge of the rooftop while cameras flashed over and over again. And for the first time since Claire was born, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I stopped begging to be loved properly by my own child. That thought terrified me, because mothers like me build entire identities around being needed. But sitting there in the cold Chicago night, watching another woman replace me in my daughter's life, I realized something devastating. Claire no longer needed me emotionally, only financially. And deep down, I think she already knew it too. I barely slept the night before the wedding. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire standing beside Victoria during those family photos while I sat invisible in the background like some distant guest. At around 4:30 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest and sat beside the hotel window watching the city wake up. Chicago looked beautiful from up there. Cold blue dawn stretching across glass buildings, taxi lights flickering below, people rushing toward lives that probably felt simpler than mine did in that moment. I wrapped my hands around a cup of coffee and finally admitted something to myself. I was grieving. Not just the loss of closeness with Claire, not just the cruelty. I was grieving the daughter I thought I raised. Because somewhere along the way, the little girl who once slept beside me after her father died had disappeared, and I didn't know if she was ever coming back. At 7 that morning, Claire texted me. Hair and makeup starts at 9. Please don't be late. Please don't be late. No good morning, no love you, no acknowledgement of the tension hanging between us. Just instructions. I arrived at the lakeside wedding venue 30 minutes early anyway. The property looked like something from a magazine. White roses everywhere, massive floral arches, rows of ivory chairs overlooking the water. Everything elegant, perfect, artificial. Wedding staff hurried around carrying linens and floral arrangements while violin music played softly through outdoor speakers. For a moment, I simply stood there staring at it all. My money built most of what I was looking at. That thought no longer made me proud. It made me tired. Inside the bridal suite, chaos was already unfolding. Makeup artists moved quickly between mirrors. Bridesmaids drank mimosas while steaming dresses hung across every wall. Claire sat near the center in a silk robe while someone curled her hair. For a brief second when she looked up and saw me, I thought I saw emotion flicker across her face. Relief, maybe. Guilt. But it vanished almost immediately. "You made it," she said distractedly. I smiled weakly. Of course. Nobody offered me a seat. I quietly placed the breakfast tray I brought onto the side table while conversations continued around me. One bridesmaid, Megan, gave me a sympathetic smile. At least someone still saw me as human. While everyone bustled around preparing for photographs, I noticed a stack of wedding programs sitting near the vanity station. Absent-mindedly, I picked one up, and that's when my entire body went cold. At the top, it read, "The wedding of Claire Reynolds and Ethan Reynolds." Below that came the family acknowledgments. Charles and Victoria Reynolds were listed prominently as families of the bride and groom. My name wasn't there, at all, not even in small print. I stared at the page for several seconds because my brain genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. Then I noticed something even worse. Beneath the ceremony dedication was another line. In honor of Victoria Reynolds, whose grace and guidance shaped Claire into the woman she is today. My vision blurred instantly. I read the sentence 3 times, hoping I misunderstood it. Grace and guidance shaped Claire. Victoria, not me. Not the woman who worked double shifts. Not the mother who buried her husband and still somehow kept food on the table. Victoria. I looked up slowly. Claire noticed my expression immediately. What? My voice barely worked. My name is gone. The room suddenly became quieter. Several bridesmaids exchanged uncomfortable looks. Claire sighed heavily, like this conversation was exhausting. "Mom, please don't do this today. Do this." As though my heartbreak was an inconvenience. I held up the program with shaking hands. "You removed me from your wedding." Claire lowered her voice sharply. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting," I whispered. "You're still here, aren't you?" That sentence hurt more than screaming would have. Still here. Like physical presence should have been enough. Like motherhood was just attendance. I looked around the room desperately, almost expecting anyone to say this was cruel. Nobody did. Then Megan quietly stepped closer beside me. "April," she murmured softly. But Claire immediately cut her off. It was my decision. The words landed like stones. Not Victoria's idea. Not Ethan's pressure. Claire's decision. My knees actually weakened for a second. I sat down slowly in the nearest chair because suddenly I couldn't trust my legs. Claire crossed her arms protectively. "It's cleaner this way. Cleaner." As if I were something messy she needed hidden. I stared at my daughter in disbelief. Why are you doing this to me? For one brief moment, real discomfort crossed her face. Then Victoria entered the suite, and everything changed instantly again. "There's my beautiful bride, Victoria," announced dramatically before noticing me. Her eyes flicked toward the wedding program still trembling in my hands. For the smallest second, she smiled, not openly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. Satisfaction. Victoria walked directly to Claire and adjusted a strand of her hair lovingly. "You look absolutely radiant." Claire smiled warmly at her, warmer than she'd smiled at me in months. Victoria glanced at me casually. "Oh, good, you found your seating assignment," I frowned. "What?" She gestured toward a nearby reception chart. I walked over slowly, and there it was, table 17. Near the back corner of the ballroom, beside distant relatives and elderly guests I'd never met. Meanwhile, the Reynolds family sat directly beside the bridal table. Even Megan looked horrified. "There must be a mistake," she blurted out. Claire immediately answered. "There isn't." The room went silent again. I looked directly at my daughter. "You moved me to the back." Claire exhaled sharply. "The front tables are reserved for networking guests and close family." Close family. I physically felt something inside me break. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The way glass cracks beneath pressure after being strained too long. I nodded slowly. "I understand now." Claire looked confused by my calmness. "Mom?" "No," I interrupted softly. "I finally understand." Victoria stepped in immediately with fake sweetness. "Weddings are emotional for everyone." I turned toward her. "No," I said quietly. "Only for people who still have hearts involved." Victoria's smile tightened instantly. Claire looked mortified. "Mom, stop." But I was done apologizing for being wounded. I carefully placed the wedding program back onto the vanity table. Then I looked at my daughter one last time. She looked stunning in her white gown. Beautiful, cold, unrecognizable. And standing there watching her lean unconsciously toward Victoria instead of me, I realized the most painful truth of all. Claire wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't being manipulated accidentally. She had chosen which woman she wanted to claim publicly. And it wasn't me. Megan quietly followed me into the hallway after I left the bridal suite. "April." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "Don't apologize for things you didn't do." Her eyes filled with tears. "I tried talking to Claire last week. That surprised me." "What happened?" Megan hesitated. "She said the wedding needed to match the life she's building now." "The life she's building now?" I nodded slowly. Then something unexpected happened. The tears stopped. Not because the pain disappeared, but because clarity finally arrived. Complete clarity. For months I kept hoping Claire would suddenly remember who loved her first. But standing there in that expensive hallway while wedding staff rushed around pretending everything was perfect, I finally accepted something devastating. My daughter was ashamed of me. And the moment you realize someone is ashamed of your love, something inside you stops begging. I looked through the ballroom windows toward the lake outside. Beautiful water, beautiful flowers, beautiful lies. And for the very first time since wedding planning began, I stopped wondering how to save the day, and started wondering whether the day deserved saving at all. About 40 minutes before the ceremony, Megan found me standing alone near the lakeside garden behind the venue. The air smelled like roses and rain. Dark clouds had started gathering above the water, though the wedding staff kept insisting the weather would hold. Funny how people say that about storms, even when they can clearly see them coming. "Claire wants to see you," Megan said quietly. I stared out at the lake for another moment before answering. "Does she?" Megan hesitated. "I think you should hear her out." I almost laughed at that. Hear her out, as though I hadn't spent 30 years doing exactly that. Still, I followed Megan back inside. The bridal suite was quieter now. Most of the bridesmaids had gone downstairs for final preparations, leaving only Claire, her makeup artist, and Victoria near the mirrors. The second I walked in, I felt tension fill the room. Claire stood immediately. "Can we have a minute?" Victoria looked annoyed. "There's barely enough time as it is." Claire's voice sharpened slightly. "Please." Victoria gave me a cold glance before leaving with the makeup artist. The moment the door closed behind them, silence swallowed the room. I looked at my daughter carefully. She looked beautiful and exhausted. Her eyes had faint shadows beneath them, despite the expensive makeup. Her shoulders were tense. Her hands kept fidgeting with the fabric of her gown. For a second, I saw the little girl she used to be, and it nearly destroyed me. Claire crossed her arms protectively. I don't want drama today. The sentence immediately hardened something inside me again. Not, I'm sorry. Not, are you okay? Just another warning to behave. I nodded slowly. Neither do I. Claire exhaled with relief, assuming that meant surrender. But I was too tired to surrender anymore. I looked around the room quietly. Designer shoes, champagne bottles. Luxury cosmetics spread across every counter. Thousands upon thousands of dollars poured into creating perfection. And yet the room felt emotionally empty. Finally, I asked the question that had been tearing me apart for months. Why are you ashamed of me? Claire froze instantly. Her face changed so quickly I knew I'd hit the truth directly. I'm not ashamed of you. You removed my name from your wedding. That's not what this is about. You moved me away from the family tables. Claire's jaw tightened. It was strategic seating. You let another woman take credit for raising you. That's not fair. No, I whispered. None of this has been fair. Claire started pacing. I knew this would happen. What would happen? You making everything emotional and difficult. There it was again. Emotional. Difficult. The labels people use when mothers stop quietly absorbing pain. I looked at her carefully. Do you know what hurts the most? Claire rubbed her temples impatiently. Mom. It's not the seating chart. She went silent. It's realizing you wanted people to think someone else mattered more than I did in your life. Claire's expression suddenly hardened in a way that frightened me. You don't understand the kind of life I'm trying to build. I stared at her, and I don't fit into it. Long silence. Then Claire quietly said, You make people uncomfortable sometimes. The words landed like ice water. How? You're too emotional, too honest. You say things that don't fit in around Ethan's world, as though she already belonged to it more than to herself. I swallowed carefully. So your solution was to erase me. Claire exploded suddenly. I was trying to protect this wedding. From what? From embarrassment. The word echoed through the room. Embarrassment. There it was, finally spoken aloud. I felt my heartbeat slow strangely after that. Not faster, slower. Like my body had finally stopped expecting kindness. I looked at my daughter for a long time before speaking again. Do you know how many nights I stayed awake terrified after your father died? Claire's eyes flickered. I worked until my feet bled because I was scared you'd lose opportunities. Mom, stop making yourself a martyr. The cruelty of that sentence physically stunned me. Martyr. As if sacrifice was manipulation. As if motherhood was performance. I nodded slowly. You really believe that now? Claire looked frustrated and trapped all at once. You always make me feel guilty for wanting more. No, I whispered. I made you believe you deserved more. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Claire turned away from me sharply. You don't understand how hard it was growing up watching everyone else have better things. I stared at her in disbelief. We were not poor, Claire, but we looked poor. That sentence revealed more truth than she realized. Not felt poor, looked poor. Image, appearance, perception. Victoria's values had already poisoned her completely. Claire's breathing became uneven now, emotions finally spilling over. You know what it's like hearing people talk about where you came from, about your mother's old car, your small house, your clothes. Every word sliced deeper. Because suddenly I understood. Claire hadn't just been hiding me. She'd been resenting me. For years. I gave you everything I could, I whispered. You gave me survival, Claire snapped. I wanted more than survival. The room went silent after that. I looked at her standing there in white silk and diamonds while memories flooded my mind all at once. Claire at 5 years old, asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. Claire at 16, crying after her first heartbreak. Claire at 22, calling me because she missed home. And somehow that girl had become this stranger standing in front of me. Then she said the sentence that shattered everything completely. I wish you weren't my mother. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the air felt frozen. Claire's eyes widened immediately after the words left her mouth, like some part of her realized she couldn't take them back. But it was too late, because once certain wounds are spoken aloud, they live forever. I felt something inside me crack quietly, not rage, not hysteria, just grief, deep, unbearable grief, and strangely, calm. I smiled, a small, broken smile. Claire looked confused immediately. "Why are you smiling?" I stared at my daughter with tears finally burning in my eyes, because suddenly everything became clear. Every insult, every exclusion, every financial request, every humiliation, all of it led here, to the truth. And the truth was simple. The daughter I loved still existed somewhere deep inside her, but the woman standing in front of me had chosen ambition over loyalty, image over love, status over family. I nodded slowly. Then today I said softly, "You'll finally learn what life looks like without me." Claire blinked in confusion. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. Because for the first time since wedding planning began, I stopped trying to save Claire from consequences. I turned toward the door calmly. Behind me, Claire's voice suddenly sounded uncertain. "Mom." I paused briefly, not turning around, not anymore. Then I walked out of the bridal suite while my daughter stood there in stunned silence behind me. And as I stepped into the hallway, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The moment I stepped into the hallway outside the bridal suite, my hands stopped shaking. That surprised me. After hearing my daughter say she wished I wasn't her mother, I expected to collapse emotionally. I expected tears, panic, maybe even humiliation so deep I couldn't breathe. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Not because I wasn't hurt, I was devastated. But devastation has a limit. Eventually, pain crosses a line where something inside you simply goes quiet, and in that silence, clarity arrives. I looked down at my phone and called Rebecca. She answered immediately. "Well," her voice told me she already knew something terrible had happened. I leaned against the hallway wall and closed my eyes briefly. She said it. Silence. Then Rebecca asked softly, "The title line." I nodded before realizing she couldn't see me. "Yes." Another pause. Then her tone changed completely. Professional. Steady. "Are you ready to proceed?" I looked through the ballroom windows toward the ceremony setup outside. Guests were arriving now. Luxury cars, designer dresses, smiling photographs. A perfect performance built on top of months of cruelty. And suddenly, I realized something important. Nobody there had cared about my dignity, so why was I still protecting theirs? "Yes," I said quietly. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "I'll begin immediately." I ended the call. Then I made the second call. The wedding planner answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Ms. Butler. We're just about I need to cancel several services under my authorization." Dead silence. Then I'm sorry I walked slowly toward a quiet corner near the garden entrance. "The premium bar package," I said calmly. "The upgraded floral installations. The after-party lounge. The vintage limousine service. And the live jazz reception extension." The planner sounded horrified. "But the wedding starts in less than an hour. I'm aware. Ms. Butler, those balances are still pending. If we cancel now—" "Yes," I interrupted softly. "That's exactly what I'm doing." Silence again. Then the careful corporate voice returned. "Legally, those contracts are under your name, so of course you have the authority." "I know." The planner lowered her voice. "Should I notify the bride?" I stared out at the lake. "No," I said quietly. "Let them figure it out themselves." Then I hung up. For a few seconds, I simply stood there listening to distant violin music drifting across the venue. My heart hurt so badly it felt bruised. But underneath the grief, something else existed now too. Self-respect, tiny, fragile, but finally alive. The ceremony itself still happened. Of course it did. People like Victoria Reynolds cared too much about appearances to stop a wedding over logistical disasters. So the guests took their seats overlooking the water while the string quartet played softly beneath gathering storm clouds. I sat alone at table 17, exactly where Claire wanted me, near the back, far from the family, and for once, I stopped trying to earn my way closer. The ceremony passed in a blur. Claire walked down the aisle looking breathtaking in white silk while guests cried emotionally around me. Ethan smiled at her like a man who believed he'd won something valuable. Maybe he had. Maybe they both had. Two people willing to trade authenticity for image usually find each other eventually. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married today?" Victoria stood proudly beside Claire. Not me. That hurt more than I expected, even after everything. I lowered my eyes quietly and folded my hands together so nobody would see them trembling. But then something interesting happened. About 10 minutes into cocktail hour, confusion started spreading through the venue. At first it was subtle, whispers between staff members, managers walking quickly across the ballroom, servers suddenly removing unopened champagne displays. I saw Victoria frown immediately. She grabbed one of the coordinators sharply. "What's happening?" The coordinator forced an uncomfortable smile. "Minor vendor adjustments." Adjustments. I nearly laughed into my wine glass. Then came the flowers. Massive white floral towers that had framed the ballroom entrance all morning suddenly disappeared. Workers quietly began dismantling half the premium installations. Guests started noticing immediately. One woman whispered loudly near my table, "I thought this was supposed to be a luxury reception." Another guest looked confused. "Why are they taking decorations down?" Across the room, Victoria's face turned pale. She marched toward the event manager near the dance floor. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. There must be some mistake, outstanding balances, contract authorization, removed services. Then Victoria's eyes scanned the ballroom desperately until they landed on me. And in that exact moment, she understood. Our eyes locked across the crowded reception hall. For the first time since meeting her, Victoria Reynolds looked afraid of me. Not superior, not smug, afraid. The realization should have satisfied me more than it did. Instead, I mostly felt tired. A few minutes later, Ethan stormed across the ballroom toward the vendor station, while Claire followed behind him, still smiling nervously for guests, who kept trying to take photos with her. "What do you mean, canceled?" Ethan snapped loudly. The coordinator kept her voice calm. "Sir, several premium services were withdrawn by the authorized financial party." Claire frowned. "What authorized party?" Nobody answered immediately, then slowly. Both of them turned toward me. I sat quietly at my distant table sipping water. Claire's expression changed from confusion to disbelief. No, 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 no. That look almost said the words for her. She never imagined I'd stop protecting her from consequences. Victoria reached them seconds later, looking furious. "What did you do?" she hissed at me across the room. Guests nearby immediately fell silent. I stood slowly, not dramatically, just calmly. "I canceled the portions I was still financially responsible for." Claire stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. "You can't do that. I already did." Ethan stepped forward angrily. "Are you seriously trying to ruin our wedding?" The irony of that question nearly made me laugh. Ruin. As though they hadn't spent months humiliating me first. I looked directly at him. "No, Ethan. I simply stopped paying for a performance I was no longer welcome in." Several nearby guests visibly reacted to that. Whispers spread instantly. Claire's face flushed red. "Mom, not here." Interesting. Now she suddenly cared about public embarrassment. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "This is unbelievably petty." I stared at her calmly. "No." What was petty was removing a mother from her own daughter's wedding because she didn't fit your image. Silence exploded across the ballroom. Absolute silence. Even the musicians stopped playing briefly. Claire looked horrified. "Why would you say that out loud?" There it was again. That isn't true. Just panic that people heard it." I suddenly realized something devastating. My daughter cared more about strangers judging her cruelty than about the cruelty itself. The coordinator awkwardly approached Ethan again. "Sir, unless the remaining balances are settled immediately, we'll also need to close the premium bar service within the hour." Victoria physically turned white. "How much?" The coordinator quietly handed her a printed invoice. Victoria's eyes widened. Ethan cursed under his breath. And Claire? Claire looked terrified for the very first time all day, because suddenly the fantasy was cracking publicly. the perfect image, the luxury, the illusion of effortless wealth. All of it depended on someone they pushed to the back of the room, me. And standing there watching panic spread across the faces of people who treated me like I was insignificant, I finally understood something clearly. The moment you stop allowing people to use your love against you, their power disappears. The ballroom didn't collapse immediately. That's not how real endings happen. They unravel, slowly, in pieces. First came the music stopping, then the servers quietly removing champagne bottles from tables like someone was undoing a dream, one object at a time. Then the whispers, then the panic, and finally, the realization. I stood near table 17, watching everything I had quietly paid for over months begin to disappear in real time, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of something far more dangerous, detachment. Because once you stop begging to be valued, you stop being afraid of what people lose without you. Across the room, Ethan was arguing with the wedding coordinator. "What do you mean it's canceled?" he snapped. His voice carried through the ballroom now, louder than the music had been, more attention-grabbing than the ceremony itself. Guests turned in their seats. Phones started lifting discreetly. This was no longer a wedding. It was becoming a scene. The coordinator stayed professional, though her expression was tight. "Sir, several premium services were withdrawn due to outstanding financial responsibility reverting back to the original payer." Ethan's face twisted. Original payer. He turned and looked directly at me. That moment felt like a spotlight hitting my chest. Claire followed his gaze immediately. Her expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "No," she whispered, not loud. Just enough for me to hear. Victoria pushed through the crowd, next her heels sharp against the marble floor. "What is going on?" she demanded. People moved aside instinctively when she approached. She always commanded rooms that way, or at least, she used to. The coordinator repeated the explanation more slowly this time. Victoria listened, and I watched something crack inside her carefully controlled expression. For the first time since I met her, she looked uncertain. Not because she lost money, but because she lost control. Ethan stepped forward aggressively. "This is insane," he said. "April, fix this." I blinked slowly. Fix this. As though I was still the quiet woman they could assign responsibilities to, as though humiliation had never happened, as though I was still theirs to use. I stayed seated. "No," I said calmly. That one word changed the atmosphere instantly. Guests went quiet again. Even the servers stopped moving for a moment. Claire walked toward me slowly now. Her voice was shaky. "Mom, what did you do?" I looked at her, really looked at her. White dress, perfect hair, eyes filled with panic that had nothing to do with love, everything to do with exposure. "I stopped paying for what I was no longer part of," I said softly. Claire shook her head quickly. "That's not fair. The wedding is today." "Yes," I replied, "and I was erased from it yesterday." Her face flinched, just slightly, but enough. Victoria interjected sharply. "This is about control, isn't it?" I turned to her. For the first time, I didn't feel small in front of her. "Ironic," I said quietly. "Coming from you." Gasps. I heard them. Victoria's jaw tightened. "You're embarrassing your daughter." I almost smiled. "That's interesting," I said, "because I thought I was removed for exactly that reason." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Truth always sounds louder in expensive rooms. Ethan suddenly stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're ruining everything Claire has worked for." That sentence hit something inside me, not because it hurt, but because it revealed how deeply he misunderstood everything. Claire had not built this alone. She had been carried. By me. By years of sacrifice she now refused to acknowledge. I stood slowly, not aggressively, not dramatically, just done sitting. "Let me make something very clear," I said quietly. Everyone in the ballroom instinctively listened. "I did not ruin this wedding." I looked directly at Claire. "You did that the moment you decided I should disappear from it." Claire's lips parted slightly. No words came out, for once. Nothing rehearsed, nothing defensive, just silence. I turned slightly toward the guests, now watching everything unfold, and all I did today was stop funding my own erasure. The coordinator shifted uncomfortably. Victoria finally snapped. This is outrageous. I met her eyes calmly. No, what's outrageous is teaching a daughter that love is something you edit for appearances. That line landed. Hard. I saw it in a few guests' expressions. Even some of the staff paused. Claire suddenly stepped forward again, voice breaking. Mom, please. We can talk about this later. Later, of course. After the photos. After the reception. After I was invisible again. I shook my head gently. No, Claire. We've been talking about this for months. You just stopped listening. Her eyes filled now, but not fully with remorse, with fear. Fear of losing control of the narrative. Victoria leaned toward Ethan urgently. We need to fix this now. Ethan nodded sharply and turned back to the coordinator. Tell them to reinstate everything. We'll pay whatever is needed. The coordinator hesitated. I'm afraid the authorization was already reversed. Victoria's face hardened. Then we transfer funds. A pause. Then the coordinator said something that silenced them completely. There are no sufficient guarantees on file without the original account holder. Original account holder. Me. For the first time, I saw something in Victoria's expression I hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not entitlement, but calculation. Fast, desperate. Because suddenly she realized something terrifying. They didn't have leverage anymore. Ethan ran a hand through his hair aggressively. This is insane. Claire turned toward me again, tears now spilling. Why are you doing this? Her voice cracked at the end. And for a second, just a second, I almost softened, because that was the voice I remembered. The little girl who used to call me when thunderstorms scared her, the teenager who cried when she failed her first exam, the daughter who once said she couldn't imagine life without me. But then I remembered the bridal suite. I remembered the program. I remembered the sentence, I wish you weren't my mother. So I stayed steady. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said quietly. Claire shook her head. Yes, you did. That hurt more than anything else, because she genuinely believed it. I stepped slightly closer. No, I said softly. I did this because I finally stopped letting you hurt me. Silence again. Longer this time. Different this time. Less chaos. More truth settling into the room. Guests were no longer just watching a wedding. They were watching a fracture, a family breaking in real time. Claire whispered, So what happens now? That question wasn't angry. It was lost. I looked at her for a long moment, and then I answered honestly. Now you learn what life looks like when love doesn't come with unlimited access. Her breath hitched. Victoria immediately stepped in. This is unnecessary drama. But her voice lacked confidence now. Even she knew. The performance was ending. Ethan looked around the ballroom, realizing guests were filming openly now. Whispers spread. Phones recorded. The illusion was gone. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Not just a ruined wedding, but a system collapsing. Built on image, maintained by money, and exposed by absence. Claire took one small step toward me. Mom, please don't leave like this. For the first time all day, her voice wasn't entitled. It was scared. But I had already learned something painful. Fear is not the same as love. I met her eyes gently. I didn't leave you, I said softly. I stopped disappearing for you. Then I turned away and walked out of the ballroom while my daughter stood in the middle of everything she built, watching it finally stop depending on me. I didn't look back when I left the ballroom, not because I was strong, but because I was afraid that if I did, I might break in a way I couldn't recover from. The hallway outside was quiet in a strange suspended way, like the entire building was holding its breath after the collapse of something it didn't expect to witness. Behind me, I could still hear faint echoes, raised voices, confused guests, the sharp edge of Victoria's anger, but it all felt distant now, like it belonged to another life. I walked until I reached a small service corridor near the staff exit where no guests would follow. My hands were still trembling slightly, though not from panic anymore, from release. Then my phone vibrated. Once, twice, then again. Claire. I stared at her name on the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to answer. That instinct had ruled my life for over 30 years, but something had changed inside me now. I didn't press accept. Instead, I turned the phone face down on a bench and sat down slowly for the first time in hours. My chest ached, not sharply, but deeply, like grief finally settling into its permanent shape. Footsteps approached a few minutes later. I looked up, expecting a staff member. Instead, it was Megan. She looked pale, overwhelmed, holding her phone tightly in her hand, like she wasn't sure what to do with it. "April," she whispered. I gave her a small nod. I heard everything she said quickly. I mean, what's happening out there? Everyone is recording it. Of course they were. Modern humiliation doesn't stay private anymore. Megan hesitated before sitting beside me. "I don't think Claire understands what just happened," she said carefully. I let out a slow breath. "She will." Megan looked down at her hands. "Victoria is screaming at the vendors. Ethan is trying to calm guests. Half the reception staff are packing up." A faint, almost humorless smile crossed my face. "Sounds like a successful wedding." Megan looked at me sharply. "You don't deserve this." That sentence almost made me cry again. Almost. But I was past the point of falling apart now. Instead, I whispered, "I spent my entire life trying to make sure she never felt the way I do right now." Megan didn't respond immediately. Then quietly, "Sometimes love doesn't land the way we intend it to." That landed differently, soft, true. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Megan spoke again. "Claire is looking for you." I closed my eyes briefly. I know. She's crying. That part hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted her pain, but because I realized something terrifying. Even now. Even after everything. A part of me still responded to her suffering before my own. Years of conditioning don't disappear in one betrayal. I stood slowly. "Where is she?" Megan hesitated. "Bridal suite." I nodded and walked back, not because I was ready to fix things, but because I needed closure. The hallway back to the bridal suite felt longer this time, heavier, like every step required more emotional weight than physical effort. When I reached the door, I stopped for a moment. Inside, I could hear Claire crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just broken in a way I had only heard once before, when her father died. I pushed the door open slowly. Claire was sitting on the floor in her wedding dress, makeup smudged hair partially undone. The image hit me like a memory I wasn't ready to relive. She looked up immediately when she saw me. "Mom." Her voice cracked instantly. I closed the door behind me quietly. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then Claire stood up quickly, wiping her face. "I didn't mean it," she said immediately. "I didn't mean any of it." I stayed still. Because I had learned something important now. Words spoken in fear are still rooted in belief. "What part didn't you mean?" I asked gently. Claire shook her head rapidly. I was overwhelmed. Victoria was pushing me. Ethan. Everything just got too complicated. Too complicated. That phrase again. As if cruelty was a scheduling issue. I stepped slightly closer. "You said you wished I wasn't your mother." Claire flinched. "I didn't mean it like that." I studied her face carefully. "What did you mean then?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Silence stretched between us. Finally she whispered, "I didn't want people judging me." That honesty hurt in a different way. Not sharp, but deep. Because it confirmed everything. "I wasn't judging you," I said quietly. Claire looked down. "I know." Another silence. Longer this time. More fragile. Then she stepped toward me, hesitantly. "I messed up," she said. "I really messed up." I didn't respond immediately. Because apology and understanding are not the same thing. Claire continued quickly. "Can you fix it? Please. The guests are leaving. Ethan is panicking. Victoria is, everything is falling apart." There it was again. Not "I miss you." Not "I hurt you." But "fix it." My chest tightened painfully. I looked at her carefully. "Do you understand what actually happened today?" Claire nodded quickly. "Yes. You canceled things, and everything collapsed." I shook my head slowly. "No." She frowned. "What?" "You erased me," I said softly. Silence. Claire blinked. "That's not what this is about." "Yes," I replied. "It is." Her voice rose slightly. We can fix this. Just reauthorize everything. We can still salvage the reception. Salvage. Even now. Even here. She was still thinking about the event, not us. I took a slow breath. Claire, do you hear yourself right now? She hesitated. What? You're not asking me to be your mother, I said gently. You're asking me to be your solution. That hit her harder. I saw it. For the first time, she didn't have a quick response. Her voice softened. I don't know how to do this without you. That was the closest thing to truth I had heard all day. And for a moment, just a moment, my heart broke again in a different direction, because that sentence contained the version of Claire I had raised. The one who used to hold my hand crossing parking lots, the one who used to call me when she was scared. But that version was buried under something else now. I shook my head gently. You've been doing it without me for a long time, Claire. She frowned. That's not true. It is, I said quietly. You just didn't notice because I kept making it easy. Silence. Her eyes filled again. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know. That surprised her. But you did, I added softly. Claire's breath shook. What do I do now? That question wasn't about logistics anymore. It was about identity. And I realized something important. This moment was the crossroads, not for her wedding, but for her as a person. I stepped closer slowly. You start by understanding that love is not something you edit for comfort. Claire whispered, I love you. My chest tightened. I know, I said. Then I paused. But love without respect becomes something else. Silence. Claire lowered her head. What am I supposed to do? For the first time, I didn't immediately rescue her. Instead, I said, you sit in what you've done. Her eyes widened slightly. You leave the wedding? Yes. She shook her head quickly. That will destroy everything. I met her gaze calmly. Everything already collapsed when you decided I didn't matter. That truth hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Claire slowly sank back onto the edge of the bed. For the first time since I entered the room, she wasn't trying to fix. She was just feeling. I sat down across from her, not as a provider, not as a rescuer, but as a mother who finally stopped disappearing. And for the first time in a very long time, we sat in silence that was honest, not comfortable, but real. The silence in the bridal suite didn't feel empty anymore. It felt heavy, like the air itself had finally stopped pretending. Claire sat on the edge of the bed in her wedding dress, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The same hands that once clutched mine in parking lots, the same hands that now trembled slightly as reality settled in. I stayed seated across from her, not moving closer, not pulling away, just present. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fix her emotions before she could feel them. Outside the suite, the chaos of the collapsed wedding still echoed faintly through the hallways. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, the distant metallic sound of staff dismantling what had just hours ago been called perfect. Claire finally spoke, her voice smaller than before. Is it really over? I understood what she meant. Not just the wedding, everything built around it. I chose my words carefully. Something ended today, I said quietly. Yes. Her eyes lifted to mine. But it doesn't feel like what I expected, she whispered. I nodded slightly. It rarely does. Claire swallowed hard. I thought if everything looked right, it would feel right. That sentence told me everything I needed to know about how she had been living. Image over truth. Presentation over substance. She looked down at her dress. I ruined it, didn't I? The question wasn't defensive anymore. It was hollow. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't simple. Finally, I said, You didn't ruin a wedding, Claire. She looked up slowly. You ruined trust. The words landed softly but deeply. Her breath caught. I didn't mean to, she whispered again. I studied her carefully. I know, that part was true. Intent and impact are not always the same thing. But they both matter. Claire pressed her fingers to her forehead. Everything was supposed to be perfect today. A bitter sadness rose in my chest. That's the problem, I said gently. You cared more about perfect than honest. She flinched slightly, then silence again. This time she broke it. Mom, what happens now? It was the first time she had said Mom in a way that didn't feel dismissive. It sounded uncertain, human. I exhaled slowly. Now you live with what you chose. Her eyes widened. I don't want to lose you. That sentence hit differently than the rest, because it was real, raw, unpolished. I looked at her for a long moment. I'm not asking you to lose me, I said quietly. Claire's voice trembled. Then what are you asking? I hesitated, because this was the part no one prepares you for. Loving someone who hurt you doesn't disappear just because you finally stop tolerating it. I'm asking you to see me, I said softly, not as something inconvenient, not as something to manage, as your mother. Claire's eyes filled again. I did see you, she whispered. I didn't want people to see me through you. That honesty hurt more than anything else she had said, because it confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was identity conflict. Claire wiped her face quickly, smudging her makeup further. I don't know who I was supposed to be today, she admitted. For the first time, she sounded like someone who had lost herself, not just lost control. I stood slowly and walked toward the window. Outside, the lake shimmered under shifting gray clouds. The wedding setup looked smaller from here, less magical, more fragile. I think you were trying to be someone Victoria would approve of, I said quietly. Claire didn't deny it. That silence was answer enough. She said I needed to present better, Claire whispered, to fit into Ethan's world. I turned back toward her. And did it work? Claire hesitated. No, she admitted. A pause, then softer. It didn't feel like me. That was the first real truth she had said all day. I sat back down slowly. Claire, I said gently, you can't build a life by constantly editing yourself for other people. She looked at me with tired eyes. I thought that's what success was. My chest tightened. Who taught you that? She didn't answer immediately, but we both knew. Victoria, Ethan, the world she wanted to impress. And maybe even me in ways I never intended, because I had spent my life sacrificing silently, and somewhere along the way, Claire learned that love meant disappearing parts of yourself. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. Success is not erasing yourself to be accepted. Claire looked down again. Then what is it? I thought for a moment. Being able to look at your life and recognize yourself in it. Silence. The ballroom noise outside had softened now. The wedding was no longer unfolding. It was dissolving. Claire spoke again, quieter. Ethan is angry. I nodded. I imagine he is. And Victoria, she hesitated. She said this is humiliating. A faint, tired smile crossed my face. Of course she did. Claire looked up at me carefully. They're saying you caused it. I met her eyes. Did I? That question hung between us. Claire didn't answer immediately, then softly. You stopped paying. Yes, I said. After I was erased from your life. Her face tightened slightly. That wasn't my intention, but it was your decision, I replied, gently. Silence again. Longer this time. Less defensive. More reflective. Claire finally whispered, I didn't realize how much you were involved. That sentence carried weight. Not apology, but awareness. I nodded slowly. I know. Another pause. Then she asked something I didn't expect. Did you ever think I would become like this? The question surprised me, not because it was unfair, but because it showed she was finally looking inward. I chose honesty. No, I said. I thought you would become stronger, her eyes flickered. But I think you confuse strength with approval. Claire's lips parted slightly. I continued softly. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that being accepted by the wrong people mattered more than being honest with the right ones. That landed quietly, not dramatically, but deeply. Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice breaking. Do you hate me? The question pierced straight through me, because it was so painfully human. I stood and walked back toward her slowly. Then I knelt slightly so we were closer at eye level. No, I said firmly, I don't hate you. Tears filled her eyes immediately. But I am hurt by you, I added gently, and that matters too. She nodded quickly, crying now. I'm sorry. I didn't rush to comfort her this time. Instead, I stayed still, letting her feel it, letting both of us feel it, because forgiveness without understanding is just repetition waiting to happen. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I know, I said softly. Another pause. Then I added, but you don't fix something like this in a day. Claire looked at me with fragile hope. Then what do I do? I took a slow breath. You start by telling the truth, I said. To yourself first. She nodded shakily. And then I hesitated. Then you stop asking for approval from people who only value your image. Silence. Outside, the distant sound of the venue faded even more. The wedding was officially over now, even if no one had said it aloud. Claire looked down at her hands. I don't know how to be without them. That was the real fear underneath everything. Not losing a wedding. Losing identity. I reached out and gently placed my hand over hers. Then you learn, I said softly. Like I did. Her fingers tightened slightly around mine. Not letting go. Not pulling away. Just holding on. For the first time all day, not as a performance, but as a daughter who finally didn't know what came next. The wedding venue was almost empty when I finally stepped outside the bridal suite with Claire. What had been a carefully constructed world of elegance only hours earlier now felt stripped down to something raw and unfinished. Servers were quietly packing away glassware. Floral arrangements were being dismantled in silence. Guests had already begun to leave in clusters, speaking in low voices that carried more confusion than celebration. The illusion was gone. Completely. Claire walked beside me, slowly, still in her wedding dress, holding the fabric slightly so it wouldn't drag on the floor. She looked like someone walking out of a version of her life she no longer recognized. We didn't speak at first. There was too much in the air between us, too many words already spoken, too many that couldn't be taken back. We reached the quiet garden path near the lakeside, away from the remaining guests. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying the scent of damp roses and rain-soaked grass. Claire finally stopped walking. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, she said quietly. Her voice wasn't defensive anymore. It was lost. I turned to face her. For the first time that day, I saw not the bride Victoria had shaped, not the woman Ethan expected, but my daughter underneath everything. Tired. Confused. Human. You don't have to do anything right now, I said gently. Claire shook her head slightly. But everything is falling apart, I nodded. Yes, a pause. Then I added, and sometimes that's what honesty feels like at first. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I thought you were going to fix it. That sentence stayed in the air for a moment longer than I expected. I studied her carefully. Fix what I asked softly. The wedding. Ethan. Victoria. Everything. I exhaled slowly. Claire, I'm not responsible for holding your life together. Her lips parted slightly like she wanted to argue, but no words came. For the first time, she didn't have a rehearsed answer. Only silence. Then she whispered, I don't know who I am without them. That was the truth underneath everything. Not the wedding, not Ethan, not Victoria. Identity. I stepped closer slightly. You're still you, I said gently, just without the noise. She frowned faintly. The noise. The approval. I said, the expectations. The performance. Claire looked down at her hands again. They made it feel important. I nodded slowly. I know. Another silence settled between us. This one different from before. Less painful. More reflective. Claire spoke again, softer. Ethan hasn't called me. I wasn't surprised. Men like Ethan rarely stayed present when control slipped. And Victoria, I asked. Claire gave a small, tired laugh without humor. She said I embarrassed the family. There it was again. Embarrassment. The word that had followed me all day like a shadow. I watched Claire carefully. And what do you think I asked? She hesitated. Then quietly, I think I embarrassed myself. That honesty felt like the first real crack in the wall she had built around herself. Not collapse, but opening. I nodded. That's where change starts, I said gently. Claire looked up at me. Do you think I ruined everything? I paused before answering, because the truth wasn't simple. No, I said finally. I think you finally saw what everything was built on. Her eyes filled again. That doesn't feel like comfort. It isn't meant to, I replied softly. It's truth. A gust of wind moved through the trees beside the lake, shifting the fabric of her dress slightly. She looked exhausted now, not just emotionally, deeply. Like someone who had been running for years and only now realized she didn't know where she was going. I hurt you, she said suddenly. Not a question, a statement. I didn't deny it. Yes, her voice broke slightly. I didn't mean to. I nodded again. I know. A pause. Then I added, but impact doesn't disappear because intent was different. She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing that. When she opened them again, something had changed in her expression. Not resolution, but awareness. What happens now? She asked again. I looked out toward the lake. The water was still, quiet, unmoving. I think you go somewhere quiet, I said gently, away from everyone's expectations, away from pressure. Claire frowned slightly. Like what? A break. Like clarity, I said. She looked uncertain. And you? That question surprised me. I turned back toward her. I go home, I said simply. Claire blinked. You're leaving? I nodded. Yes. Her eyes widened slightly. Just like that, I hesitated. Not because I doubted the decision, but because I knew what it meant emotionally. Yes, I said softly, just like that. A long silence followed. Then Claire stepped forward slightly. Are you done with me? The question was fragile, fearful. I felt something tighten in my chest, because that was never the question. I shook my head gently. No, I said. I'm not done loving you. Her breath shook slightly. But I am done disappearing for you. That line landed between us heavily. Claire lowered her gaze. I don't want to lose you. I know, I said softly. Another pause. Then I added, but you can't keep me, only when it's convenient for your image. Silence. The wind moved again across the lake. Claire wiped her face slowly. I don't know how to fix what I did, she whispered. I looked at her carefully. You don't fix it all at once, I said. You start by not repeating it. She nodded faintly. Then she asked something smaller. Can we still talk? I didn't answer immediately, because that answer wasn't about emotion. It was about boundaries. Yes, I said finally, but not the way we used to. She looked confused. What does that mean? It means, I said gently, I won't be the person you turn to when things fall apart because you ignored the truth. Claire swallowed. And when I need you. The question was quiet, honest. I stepped closer and placed my hand lightly on her shoulder. Then you come as my daughter, I said softly, not as someone trying to fix an image. Her eyes filled again, but this time she nodded, slowly, understanding something for the first time, not fully, but enough. A few minutes later, we walked back toward the venue together in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one wasn't full of judgment or expectation. It was full of something else. Possibility. As we reached the edge of the parking area, Claire stopped. Mom, I turned. She hesitated. Then quietly, I'm sorry. I nodded once. I know. A pause. Then she added, I don't know how to be better yet. I gave a small, tired smile. That's okay, I said. Just don't pretend you're not trying. Claire exhaled shakily. Then, for the first time in months, she didn't argue. She just nodded and stood there in the fading light of what had been a wedding, but was now something else entirely, an ending, and maybe if handled carefully, a beginning. 3 months passed before Claire called me without hesitation, not to ask for money, not to fix a crisis, just to talk. That alone told me more about change than any apology ever could. I was sitting on my porch in Ohio that afternoon when my phone rang. The air smelled like late summer warm grass, distant rain, the kind of quiet that only small towns seem to understand. Her name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment longer than I expected. Then I answered. Hi, Mom. Her voice was softer now, less sharp edges, less performance. Hi, I replied gently. A pause followed. Not uncomfortable, just real. How are you? She asked. It was such a simple question, but it felt different coming from her now. Not automatic, not transactional. I'm okay, I said honestly. You. Another pause. I'm Learning, she admitted. That word stayed between us. Learning. Not fixed, not healed, just in progress. Claire had moved out of Chicago shortly after the wedding collapsed. Ethan and Victoria's financial situation had become more unstable than anyone had publicly admitted. The condo deal fell apart completely, and within weeks their polished world began to unravel behind closed doors. Claire never told me all the details, and I didn't ask. Some truths don't need constant revisiting to be understood. I started therapy, she said quietly after a moment. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That's good. I didn't think I needed it, she admitted. But I think I did. Silence settled again. Then she added, I think I was trying so hard to become someone else that I forgot how to be myself. I leaned back slightly in my chair. That happens more often than people admit, I said softly. A faint breath of laughter came through the phone. Yeah, she said, especially when you're trying to impress the wrong people. That sentence felt like progress. Not dramatic, but real. After a moment, Claire's voice lowered. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I didn't respond immediately. So she continued. About disappearing. My chest tightened slightly. I didn't understand it then, she said, but I think I'm starting to now. A breeze moved through the trees around my porch. I used to think you were just difficult, she admitted, when you questioned things, or didn't fit into Victoria's world. I stayed quiet, but now I realize. Her voice cracked slightly. You were just real. That word hit differently. Real. Not polished, not curated, not approved, just real. I don't want to live like that anymore, she said quietly. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then don't, I said softly. Another pause. Then Claire asked something I didn't expect. Do you think I can still fix what I broke? The question carried weight. Not desperation this time. Responsibility. I took my time before answering. Some things aren't about fixing, I said gently. They're about changing. She was quiet. Then, will you still talk to me while I change? That question mattered more than the first, because it wasn't asking for rescue, it was asking for presence. I'm here, I said simply. But not as a safety net. I understand, she said quickly. I don't want that anymore. Another pause followed. Then she added something softer. I miss you. My throat tightened slightly. I miss you too, I admitted. And I did. Not the version of her that rejected me, but the daughter I raised before the world taught her to measure love in status and appearance. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch for a long time, thinking. Not about revenge, not about humiliation, but about something quieter. Boundaries. It had taken 62 years for me to understand that love without boundaries becomes self-erasure, and I had erased myself for a long time. That evening, I drove to the small lake near my house, the same lake Daniel and I used to sit beside when Claire was young. I hadn't been there in years. The air felt different now, not because the place had changed, but because I had. I sat on the wooden bench near the water and watched the surface reflect the fading sunlight. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be needed. I wasn't waiting for a call, or approval, or permission to exist fully. I simply existed. A few weeks later, Claire came to visit. No announcement, no spectacle, just a quiet knock on my door one Saturday morning. When I opened it, she stood there with a small overnight bag and tired eyes. Hey, she said softly. I stepped aside. Hey. She walked in slowly, looking around the house like she was seeing it properly for the first time. Not as something small or modest, just as home. We didn't hug immediately, not because we didn't want to, but because we were both still learning how to exist without old patterns. Eventually, she sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once signed countless wedding payments. I'm not with Ethan anymore, she said quietly after a while. I nodded. I know. A pause. I didn't end it dramatically, she added. I just stopped trying to be someone I wasn't. That's usually how it starts, I said gently. She looked down at her hands. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you. I didn't rush to forgive, because forgiveness isn't a reaction, it's a process. Instead, I said, I don't need you to see me perfectly, Claire. I just need you to see me honestly. She nodded slowly. I can do that. Silence followed. Comfortable this time, not empty. Later that afternoon, we walked to the lake together, the same path I had walked alone months earlier after the wedding collapsed. Claire looked out at the water quietly. It feels different here, she said. It is different, I replied. She glanced at me. Or maybe I am. I smiled faintly. Maybe both. We stood there for a while without speaking. Then Claire asked, "Do you ever regret anything I thought about that honestly?" "No," I said finally, "but I regret how long it took me to stop accepting less than I deserved." Claire nodded. "I think I understand that now." We watched the water together as the sun began to set. No urgency, no performance, just time moving forward without pressure. After a while, Claire spoke again. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were." "Good," I said gently. She looked at me surprised. "Good?" "Yes," I replied, "because we're not the same people anymore." She smiled faintly. "I guess that's true." I looked at her then, really looked at her, not the bride, not the image, just my daughter, flawed, awakening, human. "And that's okay," I said softly. Claire exhaled slowly. "Yeah," she whispered, "I think it is." We stood there as the sky turned gold over the lake, not healed, not perfect, but present, and for the first time in a long time. That was enough. I sat by the lake long after Claire had gone inside to rest. The water was still glowing faintly under the fading evening sky, like it was holding on to the last pieces of daylight before letting them go. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying what I could have done differently. I wasn't calculating how to fix someone else's choices. I wasn't shrinking myself into someone easier to love. Instead, I was simply there, present in a way I had never allowed myself to be. And I realized something that changed everything I thought I knew about motherhood. Love, when it is real, does not require self-erasure. But I had confused sacrifice with identity for most of my life. I thought being a good mother meant saying yes until it hurt. I thought being needed meant being valuable. I thought endurance was the same as love. But sitting there watching the lake move gently without needing permission from anyone, I understood the truth. A woman does not become less because she refuses to disappear. She becomes whole. Claire's journey was still unfolding. So was mine. Healing does not arrive in a single apology or one honest conversation or even a moment of clarity. It arrives slowly, through boundaries, through silence that is no longer filled with fear, through choosing yourself without guilt for the first time. That wedding didn't destroy our relationship. It revealed it. And sometimes truth looks like collapse before it looks like freedom. I used to think losing my daughter's approval was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I understand something deeper. The worst thing would have been losing myself entirely just to keep it. A few days later, Claire called again. This time her voice sounded steadier, less lost, more aware. "I signed up for another session," she said. "Therapy," and I started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown. I smiled quietly. "That sounds like you're building something new." "I'm trying," she admitted. "Not to be the person Victoria wanted, or Ethan expected, but just me." There was a pause. Then she added softly, "I think I finally understand what you meant about disappearing." I closed my eyes for a moment, not because it hurt, but because it mattered. "Yes," I said gently, "and now you're learning how to come back." Another silence passed between us. Then Claire asked something different. "Are you okay, Mom?" The question was simple, but this time it didn't feel like obligation. It felt like care. I looked out toward the lake again. "I am," I said honestly. And for the first time in a long time, it was true. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer living inside someone else's definition of my worth. "I'm proud of you," Claire said quietly. I smiled. "I know." She laughed softly at that, a real laugh. Not defensive, not uncertain, just human. Before we hung up, I told her something I needed her to hear. "You don't have to earn love by becoming someone else." There was a pause on the line. Then she whispered, "I know that now." After the call ended, I stayed by the lake a little longer. The sky had turned completely dark, stars beginning to appear above the water like quiet witnesses to change. I thought about Daniel. about Claire as a child, about all the years I spent believing love meant giving until nothing was left. And I finally understood what I should have known all along. Love is not measured by how much you lose of yourself for someone else. It is measured by whether you remain whole while still choosing to care. I stood up, slowly brushing dust from my hands. The wind moved gently across the water. No urgency, no pressure, just life continuing forward. And for the first time in my story, I didn't feel like I was chasing someone else's approval to deserve my place in it. I already had it.